somebody that looks like me can be discriminated against and excluded from a position that they're qualified for, what happens to my brothers and sisters that are fully Black, that look Black, or that look Latino, that actually face real struggles, right? Like, I knew this was happening because it happened to my father as a kid. But what happens to them when they go out and try to get a job they're qualified for? And that's when I started thinking, I have to try to do something about this. I can't just sit back and say, oh, it's okay. It's just life, And so that's where my real focus and like my real aha moment was that like, there are some real inequalities in this world. And if I can do the smallest piece of trying to make a difference, I kind of felt like I had to do that.
Welcome to Journeys Through Change, a podcast that inspires women to let go of the fear and say yes to possibility. I'm your host, Noelle Van, an author, creator, and empowerment coach who spent years in corporate America helping innovators and leaders ride the waves of change with ease and grace. I now work with women to step into change and unleash the power they have to create a life they love. Whether you're contemplating a change in your career, relationship, health, lifestyle, or anything in between, nothing's off the table. I'll be offering up simple insights to help you manage the ups and downs of change and sharing interviews with successful women who took a leap of faith to create the life they knew they were meant to live, sharing their wisdom, advice, and all the juicy lessons they learned along the way. So get cozy in your favorite comfy chair and let's get started. How far have we actually come on the road to creating a world of greater diversity, equity, and inclusion? Sometimes it's difficult to tell if we're making any progress at all, while other times we may see glimmers of hope that might be moving us little by little in the right direction. In her 20s, Marlene Godsey unknowingly moved to the Aryan Nation capital of the U.S., and during her 7 years there experienced hate, racism, and her first and only Aryan Nation parade. As horrible as these experiences were, they became the catalyst for her to do the important work she does now. Every challenge has taught her how to stand strong in who she is and to embrace the importance of addressing ignorance and intolerance by educating others. Along her journey, she has learned to never turn a blind eye to the inequities we continue to see around us. Marlene has spent the last decade in public service as an arts and culture specialist with a strong focus on serving underrepresented communities. She has navigated governmental systems and created initiatives fostering diversity and inclusion throughout communities. With a wealth of experience, she teaches professionals how to adapt, navigate, and forge successful relationships and programs within diverse communities, partnering with them on her mission to create more profound and sustainable change. Marlene, it is wonderful to have you with us. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Noelle. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here today.
I am so excited to have you here. And I feel like we are going to probably get into a lot of different things. So I want to let you decide how you kind of want to dive in. It might be good to get a little bit of background just so people kind of get a grounding and then we can kind of go from there.
Yes. So as Noelle said, I'm Marlene Godsey. So I work as a external diversity equity consultant. So what I mean by external is I found over my years of work that there's a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion trainers that focus internally. So things like microaggressions, bias awareness trainings, employee relations, which are all instrumental, right? Those are all great for any organization, any company to be successful. However, I found that there was this disparity and there's no DEI trainers focusing on external trainings. So things like actually creating relationships and programs with culturally diverse organizations and communities. So we're giving people and employees and professionals all these tools to work within their own foundation. But when they go out and try to create these relationships and try to work within the community, that's where they're falling short. I saw this need. And so I spent a little over a year creating a program to address that need. And so now I do teachings and trainings, I do webinars, and I also teach. I'm actually about to start teaching classes at our community college locally. So really exciting stuff. So so that's who I am in a nutshell.
How did you get here? Going back to your story.
What led me to this kind of? So I grew up in Las Vegas, actually. I was transplanted. I moved to Las Vegas when I was roughly 5 from New York. And growing up in a city, I always felt like diversity and differences were celebrated. I never had anyone direct racism or discrimination directly at me. And being a light-skinned Black woman, I felt like I had that privilege. I kind of was sheltered from that. But when I was in my 20s, I ended up moving to a small city with no research because we make those great decisions in our 20s, right? And I ended up in the Aryan Nation capital of the United States, where the Aryan Nation was started and thriving still. And so I was there for a couple weeks. I experienced an Aryan Nation parade that was happening downtown. I like to say kind of stuck in that community for almost 7 years because I was young, I was 20, I was broke. And so I, for the first time in my life, started experiencing racism and discrimination and exclusion from jobs and events. And it was something I never really thought I would experience. I wasn't naive to it. I had watched it affect my family, my father growing up, but I just hadn't experienced it. So when I ended up going to college and getting out of that area, I decided that I wanted to really focus on inclusion and how we can make places and spaces and programs safe and inclusive for everybody. And so I focused on that a lot in college. I started working in that field professionally when I graduated. And so I spent the last 11 years working in city government as an arts and culture specialist. And so that was really my focus, was working with underrepresented communities and creating those relationships, creating those programs so that the entire community was being served by city government, by these roles that I worked in. And that's over my journey and over time, that's where I discovered more and more and saw these disparities and started thinking, hey, I need to do something to educate others, because if I really want to make real progress, I have to share my knowledge with others.
What is really interesting to me is that you bring to the table so many things, but experience is probably our biggest teacher. So when you were in this place and you were there for 7 years, and that's formidable years, right? Your early 20s, you're kind of getting to know what the world's all about. So tell us a little bit more about, and not to say that you have to describe a particular situation, but like, what were you experiencing in your space as someone new to an environment, trying to get a job, doing all those things you do like post college? You were at college there, right? Or were you at college there?
I did do some community college in that city, and then I transferred to a university in the same state, but farther away, in the only area of that state that's considered a Democratic area.
Got it. Okay. Because I always think about those pivotal moments. And it's not to say that we all can look back and determine the exact day that something hit us, but can you think back in that time that you were there, how that seed got planted of like, and it might have evolved over time, but I really need to start looking in the direction of helping to make this better.
It's interesting that you asked that. There really was a pivotal moment, which is great. When I was there over those almost 7 years, I experienced some really interesting things, small things from slurs being yelled at me, issues going into a gas station and the attendant wouldn't take my sister's money to get gas and asked us to leave, to things as bad as I was managing a fast food restaurant and one of the customers had been yelling at my employee, so I asked them to leave. And the next day, my boss asked me not to come in because they had a small little Aryan Nation parade in front of the store protesting me. So there were little things like that that transpired that when you're young, you kind of brush things like that off, you just kind of get past it, kind of compress it. But what happened was I had been working in a dead end job, right? I got a job and worked my way up to management. And I decided, well, I've got to do something. I think I was like 23 at the time. I'm like, I've got to do something. So I went to dental assisting school because I didn't really know what else to do. It was a 1 year program. I thought, okay, why not? So I went to dental assisting school and I graduated the school with straight A's and went out, and we all had to do an externship. And I was the only woman of color in the entire program. I think there was about 30 other women in that program. And so I did the externship at a really prominent dental office, which was like 3 months long, and it was required to graduate. And after I finished that, I went out to look for jobs as a dental assistant. And I went on 13 interviews and I never got a job. Most of the interviews, not all, but most of the interviews, when I showed up, I could feel there was a change in the way that people were responding to me. I'm loud, I'm tall, I'm brown, and I talk and I carry myself in a different way, maybe than some other people that I went to school with. And so I watched every person I went to school with get a job almost immediately, most of them at the place where they did their externship. And I went on 13 interviews and I never got a job. I never got hired. There were a couple comments made from some of the dental offices that made me realize that, hey, maybe I'm not getting a job because I'm not fitting the description that they want in their office. And so I ended up just staying at my fast food job and working my way up to upper management. And that was kind of when I had that shift. And I was like, if somebody that looks like me can be discriminated against and excluded from a position that they're qualified for, what happens to my brothers and sisters that are fully Black, that look Black, or that look Latino, that actually face real struggles, right? Like I knew this was happening because it happened to my father as a kid. But what happens to them when they go out and try to get a job they're qualified for? And that's when I started thinking, I have to try to do something about this. I can't just sit back and say, oh, it's okay. It's just life, you know? And so that's where my real focus and like my real aha moment was that like, there are some real inequalities in this world. And if I can do the smallest piece of trying to make a difference, I kind of felt like I had to do that.
What's so impressive to me, as you were talking, I was thinking to myself, okay, early 20s, where we are in just in life, right? In the way that we view life and the way that we view ourselves. We're coming out of those college years. It's a real, I can remember, maybe not for everybody, but it's a time where you're really kind of coming into your own. And I say that in the very like early stages, because of course it takes more and more time. But I think it takes a strength of character to be able to see that kind of stuff and not internalize that as it's about me, right? Because think about that. You think of that age, like that's like impressionable times. So when you think about walking in 13 interviews and not getting picked, so to speak, you could go one of two ways. And it feels like you went a way of like, there's something that needs to be done here versus I'm going to internalize this and this is going to be about me somehow. Because God only knows how many messages we get earlier in life that we bring with us throughout. So like, thank goodness for that, for your perceptivity and your ability to do that. That strength of character, I think, that you don't see often at that age.
I did have my moments. I did have my pity parties and my woe is me and how dare they moments, but that's when I kind of realized that it wasn't going to help anything.
Right. Well, and not taking that away as something personal, but as a problem that could be solved. That's where the change makers, I feel like, in this world come from, right? They've got that grit and that ability to take something and really sort of shift the narrative around it right away to then do something about it. This is like your early 20s. When do you leave there? How old are you?
So I left that city when I was 27 and I moved to a different city in that same state to finish my degree at a university. So I went to college later. So I graduated college actually at 30. And as the day I graduated college, I actually walked the stage, got my diploma, got off the stage, changed my clothes, had a U-Haul waiting for me, and went and loaded my U-Haul and moved out of that city the same day.
Wow. Okay, so where'd you go to?
I went from there after I graduated college and I went to Oregon. I moved to Portland, Oregon, and I had a job waiting for me because I did an internship while I was in college in Oregon for the city, and I got offered a job before I even graduated.
Nice. Okay, so tell us about Portland. I mean, Portland, I know minimally, have been there, have visited there, but what was it like culturally when you got there?
Compared to where I was coming from, it was much more culturally diverse, much more inclusive. Now, with that being said, Portland is, I think it ranks as the whitest city for its population in the United States. But a couple of things I'll say. One, I think that's inner Portland, like city limits, right? Like that downtown, you know, the city limits are very rigid. They go around like a downtown area, very affluent areas, because I always lived in East Portland and it was very culturally diverse in East Portland. However, our community in Portland was inclusive and welcoming and loving. So it wasn't a bad thing. It was actually a really good thing. And so when I started working there, working in city government, I did large festivals and community events and community outreach. And that's when my focus was specifically underrepresented communities. So LGBTQ plus community, people of color, immigrant refugee populations.
How cool is that? Okay. And this is your early 30s at this point.
Yes, yes.
What came from there?
I did that for about 8 years, and it evolved as I was doing the work, right? As I was doing this work, I was learning more, and I was going out to groups of people, to communities of people, and I was asking questions, and I was interviewing people, and I was learning more about the way things are, gentrification, displacement, marginalization, and those things. And I was working more and more to try to improve these things, just creating these educational events, because these large festivals that I was working with these communities to create were educational components too. These cultural festivals is probably one of the easiest barrier-free ways to go educate yourself about a different culture. I got more and more into this, and I started doing continuing education, to learning more about these issues, the systemic racism in America and how it's built into every institution. I started joining diversity equity committees and I actually was on the diversity equity committee for the city in Portland, and we got to help write policy and practices that were put into the city guidelines. So that was great. And then I met my now husband, and we had a son. And after COVID, we were like, we need to get out of the city. We want to go to a small community. My husband was from a small town in Iowa. So I always really wanted to live in a smaller community. I wasn't tarnished by my experience. I just knew that I needed to choose the right place. So we did some research, and we chose a community, and we moved there. And almost within a day of being there, we bought a house virtually because things were crazy then, right? So we sold our condo in Oregon, bought a house virtually. We get there with our U-Haul, our son, all of our stuff. And within 5 minutes, I could tell that once again, I ended up in an area where diversity and differences weren't celebrated and weren't welcome. And so it was like, oh no. And this was a town of like 100,000 people. So it was triple the size of that smaller community.
Now, let me ask you this. What were the signs that showed you that?
Political signs everywhere.
Got it. Okay.
Was one of the first signs. Within a day or two of being there, people were running me off the road and I had 2 instances within a week of being run off the road and flipped off because I had Oregon plates and yelling explicits out the window. Because, we did have a lot of, during Black Lives Matters movement in Oregon, I'm not sure if you're aware, but in Portland, Oregon, they peacefully protested, might I add. The riots and things that occurred after the protests were not done by those protesters. Those were done by people that were trying to cause political problems, political issues. So that was completely separate. But during those protests, Portland, Oregon continued on protesting peacefully for over 2 years after the rest of the country stopped protesting. So people began to affiliate Oregon with being a very liberal, inclusive space. So within a couple days of being there, we had people flipping us off. I ended up pulling out my old placards, my alumni placards, and putting them on my car. So I felt some sense of security until I could get those Oregon plates off my car.
Which is so ridiculous when you think about that.
It's bananas. It's bananas, right? And then I started working in city government there, doing the same thing. I was the arts and culture coordinator for the city. That's when I really realized what I'd walked into. I started looking through the files of my new job role because the person that before me had since retired like 3 months prior. So there was no one to train me or anything. So I started looking through the files and looking through the programs. And I immediately realized that there was not one relationship, not one program with or for any culturally diverse community in the entire city. And it was a pretty diverse city. There was a 25% Latino population, a 15% Asian population. So it wasn't that the city wasn't diverse. They had even removed the word culture from the arts and culture title and just called it the arts program. That was like solidified, like we have a problem here.
Did you feel it in the people that you worked with? Like, because I'm just trying to think of the subtleties, right?
Yes,
I'm trying to get to what are those subtleties that come out that we don't think about. It's not like, I mean, what you're saying, which is the extreme of that, like people screaming obscenities, that's one. What was the vibe? Like, was it just like, we just don't talk about that? Or,
Basically, so before I worked for the city, when I moved there, I didn't have a job lined up. I was like, the universe will deliver, I'll figure it out. And so after we got there, within the first week, two positions came up, and one was the one with the city, and another one was with an organization that was like quasi city. They were the downtown district, right? They had to be associated with the city to be able to hold that power, but they controlled the entire downtown, and they were hiring a special events person. And I was like, well, this is perfect. Two jobs right in my field. I'll apply for both. I had the interview first with the downtown district. And in my interview, one of the questions was, can you tell us about a cultural event that you've done? And I was like, oh, cool. This is a great question. So one of the big events that I'd done in Oregon was creating the first ever Muslim International Festival. And that was during a time when the Muslim community was really being targeted. And so I worked directly with the Muslim community for over 2 years to create this huge festival. And so I talked about that because it was an amazing festival. And at the end of the interview, they said, do you have any questions for us? And I said, yeah, I'm just wondering if this position allows for, is there any option to create new events and festivals, or is it really just coordinating existing programs and events? And the director says, well, based on the events you told us about, I think that's a little bit too much for our small conservative town. So we'd probably just have you coordinating existing events, but we can talk about that in the future. And right then I knew I didn't get the job. I was like, they're not going to hire me.
well, and it's like you can just tell what the appetite is.
Oh,
Like,
man.
okay.
Oh, yeah. All the air sucked out of the room, and
But good question to ask, right? Because you would have found that out later.
and I'm glad I didn't get that job. I'm so glad I didn't get that job. The city job was better. They wanted change, but they didn't want it enough to actually make anybody uncomfortable. So that's what I bumped up against with the city. However, there was a new strategic plan in place, a cultural strategic plan that had just been created the year I came in. It actually just got approved by city council. So everything I asked for, every dollar I asked for, every program I asked to partner with, they had to say yes because it aligned directly with the cultural strategic plan. Everything I did, I was like, here's this plan right here, and they couldn't say no to me.
Because I was just thinking about that, like state by state, you think about all the push that we've had, and we've had that, the wave of equity and inclusion and all of that. It felt like there was a groundswell happening. We have those moments in our past 10 years. I feel like, you get these years that there's a groundswell. You see a lot of it in the workplace. You see people being hired on to support that. But it feels like state by state by state, they have their own sort of timeline in terms of how they're embracing it and when they're and I use the word embrace, not everybody's embracing it, but like how they're adopting certain things. And it's like everybody has this different comfort level of how and when they want to dip their toe. Okay, so you're there and you're working in the city. How long were you with the city for?
2 years. We stayed exactly 2 years because we didn't want to pay taxes on our house that we just bought. So we already knew within a week of being there that we weren't going to stay there. We already knew we weren't going to raise our son in that community because we didn't want him to be influenced by these things. And we also didn't want him to be fighting all the time to get ahead. So we were there 2 years to the day. We sold our house the first day we listed it on the market, and we left 2 weeks later.
Wow. Okay. We're just letting people know we're purposefully not talking about what cities that we're referring to, just to keep things objective. But okay, so you move from there, and where'd you go from there?
We ended up in Washington, back in the
Okay.
Northwest. We're in Washington now, and we're in a small town now. We found a really small town that it still has its own issues, but we haven't experienced negative stuff here. Diversity and differences are welcome here by most people, more so than not. And we found our way here. So we're happy here. We're in an area has 6 local tribes. So we're an very indigenous area. So it's great fit for us. But I will say that area that we left, it wasn't horrible. It wasn't that the people there didn't want change, because a lot of them did. I fought tooth and nail while I was there, and I created all these initiatives and these campaigns, and I had nothing but support from the community. There's some phenomenal things happening in that community. But it just took, I think, an outsider coming in and pointing out these issues to get the city on board. But the city was on board. I want to stress that because people will look up and see where I lived, and they were on board. They got there. It just took a little pushing.
What's such a, I think, gift for you in a way, I mean, that's born from obviously adversity. So I don't know how you'd want to look at it, but the gift that you have is when you go into a new role, there's this ability to shift people's perceptions. If you look at it from that perspective of like, you're not just going into a job that's like, okay, you're just going to be filling in and doing the same thing this other person did. You're coming in and you're like potentially able to really shift mindsets and get programs up and running, which is huge. Now, where you are, this is where you have the program, because I want to talk to you a little bit about the program that you do, but give us a little bit of background just on how you work with people now in your current role.
So I actually have two roles now. I actually work for the college in town locally. I work with students. And then I created a program when I was in that smaller city. I created a program because I started interviewing people and trying to figure out where this problem started or why this problem developed. And what I kept hearing over and over again is it wasn't that people didn't care, it was that they didn't know how to do the work. They were scared of trying, they were scared of doing the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing. I started breaking down the things that I've learned over the years, the way that I do things, and I used my experience, my education, my expertise, and I created this program. It took about a year. And so now what I do is I work with professionals, public and private professionals, and I lead them through this. It's 6 steps. It's about a 3-hour program, longer if it's in person because there's a lot of questions being asked. And I teach professionals how to adapt the way they're doing things now, whether it's leadership, whether they own a business, whether they manage a bank, whatever it is that they do. I teach them how to start adapting the way that they're hiring, the way that they're interviewing, the way that they are marketing, the way that they're going out and doing meetings, the way that they're volunteering and speaking with people in the community. And it's all these small adaptations and tweaks. And then I also lead them through ways to start creating transformational relationships versus transactional relationships with these culturally diverse communities. Because the entire way of creating these relationships, specifically if you are Caucasian, this is harder for you, right? And so you have to learn how to create relationships, strong, effective, transformational relationships. And that's where most professionals get caught up. They think they can do the outreach the same way that they've done the outreach with the same community, but they have to tweak things when they're talking about cultural communities because there has been so much oppression and distrust and hatred and exclusion over the years that you can't just come in and do things the same. You have to build that trust. And so I teach people how to really master the art of relationships.
First of all, a huge light bulb just went off when you said that, because coming from an HR background and have been in it for years, I will say the more recent 5 to 10 years where we've had that groundswell, like I said, of awareness and bringing it into the workplace and how can we do things better. And you have very, very, very well-meaning people that are in management positions. And I can remember having discussions around it where we were all just like, us in HR as well. How do we get our arms around this and really have an understanding? And what's really interesting about the relationship piece of this is that it always felt like there was kind of a transactional approach to it because it was like, well, okay, like any program that we would implement, this is how we do it. Step 1, step 2, step 3, where what you're saying is no. I mean, it's kind of like what you teach managers to begin with. How do you build relationships and trust with your teams? But now, how do you extend that out to communities that you may not know everything about? Because I think that there is also that fear. And I know this because I was in employee relations. And believe me, we had a lot of conversations around people having these subtle experiences that were very off putting. And the manager coming back and saying, help me, I want to do the right thing. I really do. I just don't know where to begin. So I think that is so critical how you framed it is that relationship piece is, I think, exactly what's missing. And that might be a connection point for people to understand how to bridge it.
In my experience, that is the number one piece to getting there, to making it work, to collaborating, to partnering with our culturally diverse communities. There's just no other way. And people are so worried because I've experienced uncomfortable situations where I've gone out and did something because I was unfamiliar with a certain culture. I've gone out and tried to shake someone's hand, not thinking that this culture will not shake a woman's hand. We learn by doing these things, but if you have to sit with being uncomfortable and you have to be comfortable getting uncomfortable. It's a learning thing.
What would you tell somebody to do if they didn't know how to start? But I think you might have answered part of it is like, you kind of have to go through it to get through it. Let me ask you this. When you go into the events or when you would be putting on an event for a particular culture and you don't know all the ins and outs of it, how do you broach that topic with people? Like, is there a better way to do that than not? I don't know. Maybe I'm asking for that rule book and there just isn't one.
There is a guide to doing it right. So, I mean, for one, I guess to answer part of your question is you can never do an event for another cultural community that you don't represent without that community being involved, unless you are honoring that community. So if you say you live in a community and it's predominantly Caucasian and you want to do something for Martin Luther King event, or you want to do a Juneteenth event, but you don't have anyone, you don't have enough people in that community to support that, you don't have anyone that works for you that is representative of that culture or wants to be involved, then you would be doing an educational type component where you would be showcasing like a film, an educational film, giving brief notes about the history of that culture, maybe finding someone that would be willing to accept a proclamation for that holiday, for that culture. But there's ways around it. But I would say the biggest thing people need to remember is you're never going to go in blind. You never go in blind. If you're going to do outreach to meet with a new organization, a new cultural community that you're not familiar with, Google is your best friend. You should be doing some basic research to learn about certain things, and you need to be adapting to be, appropriate. If you're going into a community where women tend to be modest, right? That's their culture, that's their religion, that's the way that they act in their community, then you're not going to go in there wearing stilettos and a short skirt. If we're not willing to make those adjustments to make other people feel comfortable and to gain that respect, then we have some more deep digging to do to figure out why that's such an issue for ourselves, right? Like that's an internal issue.
I would venture to say that us in the United States, I see this more, it's like you can feel it when you go to foreign countries. You can feel how there's a difference in like how you can immerse yourself into a culture, but you see it either way. You see it on both sides. We tend to think that we're the only language in the world. I'm being very general here, and I'm not saying everybody does this, but it feels like we have a little bit of an ignorance about taking pause before we say something, realizing like not everybody is the American way. Not everybody grew up that way. So it's just, there's like, I think a blind spot sometimes that we have because we're used to being told that like, oh, we're the greatest nation in the world. And it's a pride thing, but it's also, I don't think it's necessarily something that people do intentionally. It's just kind of the way we were brought up. It's like the US, you can say and do whatever you want. Well, of course, if you're talking with somebody from a different culture, that may be very, very different. And you may be off-putting when you don't even mean to be.
And that's a huge piece of it. We are spoiled brats, kind of, right? We've been told over and over that America is the greatest country in the world. Everything should be spoken in English and done our way, right? Even though this country was built from immigrants. We are a diverse country, and sometimes we tend to forget that. Being able to sit there, like you said, and listen, right, and educate ourselves is such an important step in creating these relationships and understanding that nothing is black and white. Everything is in the gray zone, especially when we're talking about different cultures. We are completely in the gray zone, and we have to sit back and we have to let other people lead, and we have to absorb and learn and see how we can help others instead of always trying to look how others can help us.
I love that. Yes, exactly. What would you say? I mean, just in all of the work that you have done thus far, because I'm sure you're just getting started, what's one of the biggest challenges that you've come across?
Lately, I will say, like right now where I live, it's a pretty small community. And what I've noticed in this community, when I first started rolling out my program, I was in a different community and it was There was a lot of interest. There was a lot of support. In this community, it's taken some time because people are scared of change. People don't like change, and people feel very threatened, especially community of people, I'd say 45 and over. We fear change, right? We're so scared of what's coming at us, and we don't want to change the things we've been doing because it's been successful so far. So that's really hard. So what I've started doing is I've really started sharing statistics, actual statistics with people on how quickly our country is changing, so that people start to understand that if they don't change with the rest of the country, they're not going to be successful, sustainable in the very near future. And we're talking like 15 years, we're going to see a massive shift in the United States. So I've really been working on that here. But the good thing is the college actually came to me last week, and they saw I work for the college, but it's a completely different department. And they came to me and they said, yeah, we saw your program listed in a newsletter at the Chamber of Commerce, and we looked you up, and we really want you to start teaching your class at the college.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm like, I would love to. That'll be really good to start getting people to kind of let their guard down a little bit. And, they trust the college. So come in and learn about it. I've been doing some webinars to try to just get that fear down, because when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, there's been a lot of negative connotation around the word DEI, especially recently. We hear DEI hire and all these ridiculous statements. What I teach is not a general DEI training. What I teach is relationship building with a focus on diversity, equity, and culturally specific communities. If somebody's hesitant and they don't like the word DEI, that's fine. That's not what I'm teaching you. I'm teaching you how to adapt what you're doing so that you can appeal and build a relationship with that community, because you need those communities to be successful in the future. You need to learn how to do this work.
And what's great too is that you've got the generations that keep coming up, they are much more active than we ever were in making change and embracing newness and the differences in other people. Not to say that they're more knowledgeable yet, but they're more open to those kinds of things. So the fact that you're bringing them together and loving, once again, that relationship inroad, because I know what you mean. It's like I'm going to diversity and inclusion training. Okay. Oh my gosh. You think of it as like, the connotation that like, we're going to be told what we're not doing right, or we're going to be told like, what are the rules? And what you're saying is, no, this is really about opening yourself up, because we know this by just experience alone. By doing that, you're not only making yourself better and more effective, but you're also helping your community. So it's a win-win.
It's a win-win. And that's the biggest thing. Like, it's a win for the professional learning how to do this work. And it's a win for this culturally diverse community who may have been excluded or really wanting to create this relationship, but they've been neglected in the past, right? So it's a win for everybody. Yeah, it's not just internal where you're feeling like, well, what are we doing wrong? Those trainings are really important for organizations to be successful. However, we're missing a big piece of it, and that's that external training. And that's where we're failing. We're failing that part.
Now, I want to ask you this because I know your work has just begun. This is a lot. There's a lot out there that can be changed. How do you feel like if you were to look back at yourself at 20, what would you say to yourself? Because I think of where you are now, and you have the kind of role that it affects change every day. Like, and maybe some days don't feel that way as much as others, but I'm saying in general, you have got a really important part to play. And what a cool thing to step into that and to continue to grow within that.
My first thought, just joking, that came to mind was like, run, turn around. But in reality, I think if I hadn't moved there, I don't think I would have learned as much as I did about the state of our country, about racism and discrimination. Because like I said, I was very sheltered from it. My father, he did experience some really bad things. We moved from New York when I was a kid to Las Vegas because he was a manager. He was the only African American manager at this specific business. So they moved him to the West Coast to open this business on the West Coast. And as soon as he was done, they fired him. I watched my father plummet, right? Completely, professionally, personally, everything had affected him till the day he died, really. So outside of that, and the small experience that I watched, I really didn't know enough, right? I didn't see enough about racism, about discrimination. And so if I hadn't moved there, I think I would have been a little bit naive to the realities of life.
Or it would have been a slower boil, right? Where like you were
Yeah.
seeing it little by little by little versus like you kind of saw the extreme.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, that's a good way to put it. Because it was just, yeah, you're right. It was just like extreme. And so it was so freaking eye-opening to see that, oh my God, these things are happening in this country at this time. I mean, because you picture these things happening in like the Deep South in like the 1970s. You don't picture them happening in the late 90s, early 2000s in the Northwest, So it was so I wouldn't have been, I don't think, where I am now. I don't know that I would have gotten into the field of equity as much. I think I would have had some hand in it always, but I don't know that I would have been wanting to train others and teach others about this work if I hadn't experienced those things.
It's really cool what you do. And I'm sure that this is like, when you come home at night, even though you can have exhausting days like we all can,
Yeah.
the fact that you are making change on such a, I don't know, on the level that you are is really, it's impressive. It's very impressive.
Thank you. Thank you.
What is next? What's coming next?
Well, starting the classes at the college will be coming, so that's really exciting. Hopefully I'll be starting those in about a month or so. I've got some speaking engagements coming up and just really just continuing to expand my program. I've been adding some new things to it to try to break it down. It's a lot of information that I teach in a short time, so I've been thinking about, expanding it so it can be like a week at a time. I've been looking at some different formats and just really kind of growing it and seeing where it's going to go.
Oh, Marlene, I wish you the best. I don't feel like I need to because you're a go-getter. You can tell you get things done. I was going to say, I hope you have a community of people that you probably rally around each other that are part of this, right? Because I do think it takes a special approach, a special understanding that for people to really be invited into it. And I see that you totally have that. So I just cannot wait to see how this all continues to grow for you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I thank you so much for coming on. This has been it's been eye-opening, really, for me, truly, because we learn something new with everything that we do. But I feel like your work is constantly unfolding for people. So it's important for people to know what you do and how you help people in such a deep way. So thank you again.
Thank you, Noelle. I appreciate it. It was I enjoy talking with you. You're so fun to talk to.
You too. All right. Well, that's it for now. Until next time. Thanks for listening to the Journeys Through Change podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or really wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us and leave a review if you've enjoyed this episode. And share it with a friend or on social media to spread the good word, so more women like you can find us and join in on the fun. For more information on the podcast or Day by Day book, go to livedaybyday.com.